During the course of the Second World War, the number of Allies taken prisoner swelled. Those who had been surrounded by the enemy, overrun, shot down, or even sunk, would suffer the further indignity of capture and surrender.
In the end, there was only 5 of us who were able to surrender. We got up and we gave ourselves up.
It was really a shock, which we'd never recovered from for a long time.
The prisoners were herded into camps along the eastern borders. Some of them would be behind wire for 5 years.
There must be several hundred of us, all nationalities, British, Indian, American, all kinds.
And of course we'll say, what are we put here for? What's them calling through the wire to the others? What's all this about? Nobody knew.
By Christmas 1944, the Allies tightened their grip. But instead of liberation, 300,000 prisoners of war would face a grim, unforeseen ordeal. But first, they would have to survive the harsh circumstances of captivity. With German military efficiency, the prisoners were swiftly moved to POW camps scattered across Germany. On arrival, they were processed and formally entered into the Wehrmacht records. At the start of the war, Germany had 31 prisoner of war camps, a figure dramatically increasing to 248 as the war progressed. Most were along the east side of Germany, on the borders of Poland. 134 housed British and American prisoners. Stalag 8B was one of the largest camps and housed a mixture of armed forces and air crew.
Eventually, we landed at Stalag 8B in Lambsdorff, Oberschleicher in Poland.
It was a camp arranged rather like, imagine a noughts and crosses grid with 9 rectangles.
There was a road down the middle. The Polish were on the right-hand side and we were on the left-hand side. And the Poles were marvellous to us. They threw food over and that and helped us all they possibly could.
All these huts were around. While the bottom half of the camp, they were building a bigger accommodation, and it was all built on stilts to avoid tunneling.
We saw, almost like a dream, soldiers marching towards us. We thought, who the heck are these? Anyway, as they came to us, we realized they were British from the camp we were going into. They were shouting, is there anybody from such a regiment, anybody from such a place, not, find you in the camp, and so that had a wonderful effect on us.
We went in sort of the perimeter gate, and then we were documented. Took all your particulars and your photo taken.
There were security officers running around, Germans, and all Americans. They were all German Americans who'd returned home to protect the fatherland, acting as interpreters.
I was very surprised when I saw this document. It included my mother's maiden name. And I thought, what the devil's that got to do with it? And then I spoke only a short time ago to someone who was a Slovakian. And he said, did you realize they might have thought your mother was Jewish?
With rumors circulating about extermination camps, some prisoners began to fear for their own lives.
We went to a place with a high chimney and we'd heard rumours about the death camps. We went in, but all it was a delousing place, and they stripped us off and deloused our clothes in a steamer, and we had to walk through a sheep dip, disinfected sheep dip.
Had our head shaved and all that sort of thing when we first went into the camp, disinfected, all our uniform, all our clothes taken from us, disinfected, and so we was all sitting there naked for about an hour, a couple of hours.
Our camp was in Marienburg in East Prussia, and we were given Dutch clogs. and pieces of sort of square material, they call them fuslaven, and old Polish uniforms. Some were even had blood stains on them. So we looked a bit of a mess.
There were older prisoners there, as we called them, from Dunkirk and from Crete and from North Africa and so on. And of course we had nothing other than what we stood up in. We didn't have any fighting iron, knife, fork, spoon, that sort of thing. So they said, right, come with us, you two come with me, and you go with him, and so on. And they took us back to their bunks and said, you know, I've got 2 knives here, you have a knife, and here's a comb for you, and they dug out bits of equipment for us like that.
Having arrived in camp, they now had to settle in what comforts they could find. General conveniences like washing and going to the bathroom were pretty crude. They had to make of it the best they could.
The worst aspect of that life was the latrines, I think, which were across a parade square.
The latrines were sticks driven in the ground and a long pole in between. And if you wanted to go to the toilet, you sat on this long pole, which was bending up and down. And it would be funny to see half a dozen people sitting on this there going to the toilet on this bendy pole.
The latrines were a wooden structure, if you like, a large wooden latrine with 40 holes in it. No privacy of any kind, just 40 holes in the woodwork. You just went there and did what you had to do and you came out.
And it all goes down into this sump, but in July it begins to pong a bit if it's not emptied.
And a Russian prisoner of war with a barrel cart and a hand pump came along every day and pumped out and took it across the moorland and spilt it all over the moorland, but I can't remember any particular vigorous growth from the fertilising.
One day it got so bad there was an explosion, it had blown up the latrine. And I was watching a football match and we all got camouflaged to some extent. And the roofs of the huts near this were covered. And my recollection of this poor bloke staggering, completely naked, out of the wreckage of this thing, covered. And nobody wanted to get near him, bless him.
They wanted somebody to run the shower block. Well, I became shower Führer for number 1 block, and a friend of mine was shower Führer for number 2 block. And your job was to heat up the water every morning. And you'd call in the rooms one by one, 16 people at a time for the showers, to have 3 minutes of hot water once a fortnight.
We had a stove in the room. We didn't get very little fuel, so we used to burn the bedboards. And so we finished up with about 3 bedboards needed sunburn, and used to collapse all together and go straight the way through and hit the one underneath, you know. It's quite a laugh.
You could never say it was hot. You could, in fact, if you hung your clothes on, put a piece of string all the way around this stove and hung your clothes on it, they would dry after an hour or 2, but it didn't give out very much heat, but just enough. Just enough to keep us alive, I think.
The lack of food in most camps was commonplace. For the POWs, hunger occupied their thoughts and was the high topic of conversation, if not the only topic.
We had virtually nothing to eat. The Germans came along once a day with a dustbin full of thin, watery soup, and they ladled out 1 ladleful to each person. So you had to have a tin yourself to receive it. If you didn't have a tin, you didn't get anything to eat.
Usually you had some watery soup at lunchtime, but what we call spadwater. They cook the potatoes and you had the water they were cooked in as the soup.
It was always a loaf between 5 and sauerkraut soup cabbage soup. But after about a year, we started to get Red Cross parcels came through.
The first thing we did was open up and make a cup of tea. Of course, it was marvellous. A lovely cup of tea.
Splendid parcels with tins of milk, Clem. We didn't know Clem was milk spelled backwards. Biscuits, hardtack biscuits, jam, meatloaf, tea.
And then you do your Red Cross parcel. Like, I think we'd have been dumb. We'd have been dead if we hadn't the Red Cross parcel.
The Red Cross saved our lives. I didn't smoke before the war, and when you're hungry, I started. It did help, but it was a hell of a job to give up afterwards.
When we first went into these little huts, we were given one Red Cross parcel for the hut of 5 people. As time went by, it went up to 2. Of course, by rights, according to the Red Cross, we should get a parcel each per week, which we didn't get, until we moved down to the new block. But that then only lasted for about a couple of months, and then that started to go down, because it was really Bomber Command and the Americans who robbed us by blocking up the railway lines. We couldn't get them. And the Germans would pinch them, give them half a chance anyway.
Between 1941 and 1942, Red Cross parcels began to decline. Over a period of months, even years, starvation wore the prisoners down psychologically and physically. With what little they received, they bartered or fraternized with others for food and supplies.
And you could do a little bit of bartering, you know, and you'd get an egg, or you might get a little loaf of bread, champion, just the job.
With the cigarettes and things, you could barter with anything, you see, with watches and things like that, and sometimes we'd make a deal with the guard so that you'd arrange with the civvy to do a deal, you'd notify the guard, and he'd come along just in time, and we'd split the difference.
We had a visit from some Germans, officers, because they were big-headed enough to come round to see you, really just to show off. And they would come round asking for complaints. And the very first complaint they got was, we could do with more to eat. And one of them looked round at us and he just smiled and he said, grass is good enough for you people. And that's the gospel truth.
From the moment the POWs set foot in the camp, the shock of capture began to wear off, and thoughts turned to settling down. But life was not going to be easy. The Germans would make them work for their keep. As the fighting progressed, and to keep the wheels of Germany's war industry turning, the demand for labor increased. Allied POWs were compelled to work for the German war effort. By February 1944, almost 80,000 prisoners were working for the Reich. The type of work largely depended on the location of the camp. For those prisoners in and around the Polish corridor, this consisted of construction, mining, or industrial-type work.
They sent us out to working parties. My first job was on the railway job, and we was picking up railway lines by hand, which was all frozen, and they used to stick to your hands, and it was very painful.
Somebody said, this is a coal mining district, they're coal mines. And that's where we were headed.
I joined the army in Wales to get out of the coal mines, and ended up working in the coal mines for the bloody Germans.
Many prisoners were sent to work down coal mines in countries occupied by the Germans. This not only aided the German war effort, but it helped sustain the prison camps. Some of these mines are still in operation today, like this one in Jaworzno, Poland.
they marched us to the top of mine, and these cages landed and put 30 in each, 3-decker cages, and shoved us in and down we went. I'd never seen a coal mine in my life. Got on an electric train under there, and away you went to faces.
The Germans cut corners, you know, because they wanted coal, produce coal at all costs. The Polish lives didn't mean nothing to them. They just wanted the coal out from the mines, and they cut corners to speed up the production of the coal. And it made things a bit dangerous, you know.
I suffered with claustrophobic. You know, he was always frightened that something was going to fall in. And we had what they call a Steiger, they was the foreman. They used to go in front of our boys, like as we went to work, prodding the ceiling of the tunnels, and he might say, stop. And you'd stop and he'd prod, and there'd perhaps be half a hundredweight or 100 weight of coal come down.
Well, I was in on this 4.5 feet high seam, on your knees all day, shoveling onto a belt behind you. Very often there was a huge bang like thunder, all the lights would go out, the air would go back, and you felt as if you got the flu.
You was in darkness, and you had to fiddle around and get your flint and light your lamp. It was unnerving.
The Poles were bringing out tins of cigarettes and lighting cigarettes. I thought, God, am I smoking in a coal mine? Because down in Wales it's strictly forbidden, you know.
Despite the horrendous conditions, being on the workforce was a blessing in disguise.
It was a good thing to get on a working party, really, to occupy your mind.
We got heavy workers' rations while we were working in the coal mine, and the heavy workers' rations consisted of a thick slice of bread, which had mould in it because it was very stale.
The great thing about working in the coal mines was each night you had a shower come up, which kept you fairly clean from lice and that sort of thing. It didn't keep you completely free, but it kept you, you know, mostly free.
Well, you never see daylight in winter. It was dark when you went down, it was dark when you come up.
Avoiding the coal mines wasn't easy. If you were fit, you would be put to work. But some found ways to avoid heavy manual labour.
There's some chaps had their arms broken to avoid going down. They used to get somebody with a bedboard to break their arm.
Those prisoners who were unfit to work down the mines didn't avoid work altogether. There were plenty of other tasks found for them above ground. The Germans were determined to extract as much work as possible from the prisoners.
We were in tatters, in rags. And as far as the clothing was concerned, I used to go out and work on the roads with my backside showing. And it used to be very embarrassed when they were mostly Polish girls.
And they called for volunteers. So I thought, well, I'm doing nothing here, sitting around just starving. So I decided to volunteer.
Of the various jobs assigned to the prisoners, outdoor work was generally preferred. Many of the men volunteered for agricultural duties. The work was hard, but they soon discovered their quality of life was far superior to that of the main camp.
My job in the farm was looking after cattle. All we had was 7 cows, 5 horses, and the main thing was crop growing. We grew wheat, rye, barley, whatever, and cut it all down with a scythe. Nothing mechanical whatsoever.
We were better off than the Germans. And in the evening, we used to have a cooked meal in the evening again, which could be anything.
In addition to ordinary work parties, the Germans organized construction and work battalions. These were semi-mobile groups able to move from place to place as and when needed. Some of these groups became a permanent work stalag. The best known of these was at Blechhammer. The factory the prisoners helped to build back in 1942 still stands today.
Well, it was forest cut down, and we had to start with clearing all roots out, and it's quite a big area, and to clean all roots out and level ground off, and then they started doing all the underground work, pipe laying.
We formed a gang, about 8 of us, and we used to go to the gaffer then, the German, Kegel, his name was Kegel, and we used to make a bargain before we started how much we'd do, and then we'd finish. Otherwise, if you didn't do that, you was there for 12 hours.
First off, we were laying electric cables, digging trenches. It's sand, but we had to dig twice as big because it kept falling back in on you.
The job had to be abandoned because we got down about 4 feet or something and we were digging up skeletons.
Sabotage was one way a prisoner could help in fighting back his captors, and was dependent only on the POW's ability in avoiding detection.
We used to get a couple of cigarettes and get one at lads to talk to him out of sight. And we used to put bloody pickaxe through cable.
So if you could get a Jerry who was guarding you doing work to start talking about football, and he remembered it, he'd be off and he'd be saying, nobody worked. All stood down until he went berserk, finding that nobody was working and everybody was talking football.
The German officer came and saw one bloke leaning on his shovel, and he grabbed the shovel, knocked him off his shovel and got on the shovel and rammed in and did more work in 10 minutes than we did all day. Lads were shouting, go on, that's the way to do it.
Many would face savage sentences or pay with their lives for these acts of sabotage or disobedience.
One day somebody cast a lever up the top and sent 2 empty trucks down the shaft and blocked it all off. Several Poles got shot then by the Gestapo for doing that.
I worked on synthetic petrol, and we had iron cylinders 60 or 70 feet high called camas. And every now and then we have to go up the top, change the pipes over, because the petrol used to come through clay filters. This particular day, there was 2 of us there, a fellow by the Scotsman, McGuffer, and myself. And he said to McGuffer, go up and change him over. And McGuffer, not being able to speak much German, tried to explain to him that he couldn't really, fear of heights. He said, if I go up there, I'll fall off. And he kept on, and he definitely wouldn't go up there. He was frightened to death. So the guard came over with an under-officer, and he pulled out his Luger, and he said, go up there. And he didn't go, so he shot him. Killed him there and then. You should have seen me go up there. I went up like a bloody monkey.
Prisoners that were caught breaking camp rules were often thrown into the cooler, a small prison room where they could spend weeks in solitary confinement.
And when the guard opened the door, he kicked the door open, pushed me in, slammed the door behind me, and I fell against, I knew what it was afterwards, just a board, and that was what I was going to sleep on.
I sat in the corner and for 3 months, and I used to draw rude pictures on the wall and then wait for the guards to go at night, and they let me out. Go and I have a coffee, go and play cards. Came in one night, found me playing cards. Hey, you goes, in your cell. Chucked me back in again. I was out the next night.
Enraged by the Allies' high spirits, some camps would wage psychological war on their prisoners in an attempt to shatter morale.
The Commandant reckoned he wiped his behind on the Geneva Convention, and he really allowed the guards to shoot over our heads to frighten us often while we walk around the compound, damage their own huts. Fortunately, I don't think anybody was killed that way, but it's frightening when they open up with their machine gun just to terrorise us.
We had a count every day, and in the British forces you line up in 3s. In the German you line up in 5s.
These German guards were people that were no good for the front, and if you could say they were dumb and senseless, that would have been a quite apt recognition of them.
and they couldn't count.
And one day the colonel was there, he was getting right pissed off with all this mucking about that we were giving him. And somebody broke in, they let load such a loud fart, you've never heard anything like it. It was a rip snorter. And because of that, we were penalized. We had to stand there for 8 hours for insulting the colonel.
Many of the prisoners out on working parties around Lambsdorff worked alongside slave labor camps. Occasionally, they encountered work companies from the concentration camps. At the time, Auschwitz was unknown to most prisoners.
When we got to Auschwitz, about 20 of us. We couldn't believe what we were seeing, all these men in pyjama suits, gaunt, clogs, wooden clogs. And because we got to understand they were mostly Jewish prisoners, some German political and Polish political prisoners. And the rest of the people, the civilians around about, were very curious to look at us, English people.
We weren't allowed to talk to them, they weren't allowed to talk to us, but I have spoken to one or two of them on the quiet.
The life of the Jew in Auschwitz was about 3 weeks. They were in such a state that they couldn't walk about. Up the gas chamber they went. This fella, Joseph, I gave him this and he was overwhelmed because I gave him a bit of sausage. And a couple of days after, look, he gave me that ring. And then a little while after, he disappeared. And I asked where Joseph was one morning, and all he said was, gas chamber, kaput. That's just how he said it. So they knew what was going on. They knew exactly what was going on.
The only thing that we really knew about Auschwitz was the stink and the... All depends what way the wind was blowing. You could smell that. You could, it's horrible.
Shocked at the sight of these fellow humans, there was little they could do for them, without the risk of hastening their death or being shot themselves.
We gave the Jews what we could. I mean, if you had a rest you could spare, perhaps, you think, well, give this poor devil. But if the Germans discovered a Jew with some article of clothing, they'd probably knock him to death.
And our German guard says, don't touch them, they'll sure be shot. Because even the SS, they had no compunction of shooting anybody.
We passed one of the Jews' camps. I don't know just where it was, but because one of the Jews had killed a guard with a shovel, they hung 8 of them across the gateway.
With atrocities happening all around them, the prisoners somehow had to keep up their morale while they waited with nothing but uncertain hope of ever being free men. Work seemed the mainstay of activity within most camps, but there were times when boredom set in. The German camp authorities allowed prisoners to take up wholesome pursuits on the simple premise that a man occupied in leisure was a man not attempting to escape or causing any trouble.
I became a bridge fanatic. We used to have bridge parties, I suppose you could call them. They went on sometimes 48 hours non-stop, all the time, and we got quite good at it.
We had a football pitch, and of course there was many footballers in there, professional footballers, who joined the territorials before the war, and were all captured together.
We used to make the best of everything. We had a football team, and we used to put plays on, and we used to, out of the cigarette box packets, we used to make playing cards, someone would draw, and we had a pack of playing cards.
We used to have boxing, well, MO limited to 3 rounds because you were that weak, your legs went to rubber.
To help combat this boredom in captivity, the Red Cross would send not only food, but donated items for the prisoners to entertain themselves.
My colleague and I joined the concert party, for which we got an extra little loaf of bread, And then we used to put on, we used to personate various people. My friend and I used to put in script, you know, about the goings on in the camp, with a couple of jokes, a couple of songs, and have a little sing-song sort of thing.
We had a military band, we had an orchestra, and a dance band formed from the orchestra. The camp dance band signature tune was "The World is Waiting for the Sunrise."
Unnoticed, behind all these activities, a number of prisoners were secretly preparing various means of escape. But you had to be scrutinized before you could join the escape party.
It was all very carefully decided. It had to be decided by the Tally-Ho Club, the organisation, and because you would only want the people to get out who'd got the best chance, who could speak the language of the area, or French or Polish or whatever, and so it was a very selective process. I mean, so that you didn't let anybody go out who hadn't got a chance.
We had a proper escape party. You could join the escape party, and you had to be interviewed and see that you were fully qualified to do this.
The most famous escape attempt was made in Stalag Luft 3 on the night of the 24th of March 1944. It has since been dubbed the Great Escape. It took a year of planning, digging tunnels, forging IDs, and making civilian clothes.
We got so many talents, really. I mean, you can imagine all reasonably intelligent people and all sorts of various trades and professions. So if you wanted a geologist or a scientist or a mathematician, you'd got one, you got an expert. And so that anything we wanted, there's such a lot of ingenuity went into it to make things.
"76 men escaped before the alarm sounded. Only 3 made it to freedom. 50 of the recaptured escapees were executed by the Gestapo. Even with all the distractions that were going on in the camps, the ordeal of being behind wire, day in and day out, affected the mental state of many prisoners.
Some of the blokes got a bit overcome by the conditions, and it was noticed that if a chap, after roll call, he'd go straight back to the hut, get back into bed, and stay there until he came out for roll call again in the evening. When that was noticed, the treatment was pull him out of bed, make him walk around the parade ground with everybody else. After a few days, it wore off, and he got back into to normal. But to lie in bed like that meant, well, losing your marbles.
We walked around the compound, talking, chatting, gossiping. The whole morning we'd spend just walking around the compound, doing nothing. You see animals in cages walking up and down. We were doing the same thing, just walking.
But life wasn't totally unbearable. Most camps had someone with knowledge of how to brew intoxicating beverages. With ingredients from their Red Cross parcels and others they had bartered for, they were able, in secret, to produce liquor for special occasions, such as Christmas.
The cherries used to give us jam, which was made of turnips, and that would brew up quite nicely. Well, I didn't, because I didn't know how to brew, but there's always somebody in a prison camp knew what to do.
We had all saved all the dried fruit out of the Red Cross parcels to brew up, and there were all sorts of brews. The Germans, if they found them, would throw them over. But we managed to hide ours under a big pile of coke in the boiler house.
And it was put into a barrel in the loft of the hut, and it used to rumble like mad. And of course, when there was an inspection, everybody sang, because the thing was like thunder up there.
And put it outside to ferment. In the night time it blew up. The cherries are
firing the guns everywhere, thinking we'd escaped, something like that.
And of course, when it matured, we brought it down, and you only had one glass, and you were flat on your back.
I didn't know anything about Christmas Day at all. We were out for the count on Christmas Day.
And it sent some of them blind for days. It was awful stuff. And if you give the guards stuff, it's like to be sent to the Russian front next.
Snaps tasted horrible, but it was lethal. You could burn it. But one of the chaps, we had 2 milk churns for the toilet. He was sitting on one and vomiting in the other.
You could see the huts that had had rotten brew because there was a long white line of diarrhea right through the snow, right up to the washhouse from all directions.
While imprisonment continued, the war outside the camps began to enter its final phase. In June 1944, Operation Overlord was being unleashed on the beaches of Normandy. On the Eastern Front, the Russian Red Armies began their bloodthirsty campaign, advancing towards German soil. What lay directly in their path were the POW camps along the Polish border, with over 200,000 inmates. Many prisoners have been in camps for almost 5 years, and Nazi propaganda described how Germany was winning the war.
The Germans, they'd be marching up and down, singing Gegen England, you know, to try and get your morale down, I think. Yeah, and the old Haw, he used to be on the loudspeaker telling us that England had finished and London was flat.
But the prisoners knew differently. With their electrical know-how, they became very inventive and knew the true situation of how the war was progressing.
We got wireless sets in the camp that the blokes had managed to put together by bribing the German guards. Bribing them, it was blackmail really. It got them, they gave them chocolate or something like that, then threatened to report them for having, you know, taken the chocolate.
These chaps were pretty ingenious. They used to make wirelesses and they used to make everything that they possibly could. That's why the pieces of wire and anything they found was brought back into the camp for them to use.
And the coils were some wire, aluminium wire wrapped round a stick of shaving soap, and the smoothing coils were razor blades that, you know, they put you together.
So we had, I think it was 2 or 3 radio sets in the camp, which you could pick up the BBC News.
A chap had made a wireless, and they used to keep it in the coal house where they used to stoke the boiler. They had it hid up there, and a chap used to be on watch at the door of each hut while the newscaster came round and gave us all the latest news.
But nothing was ever printed or anything like that. It was all word of mouth.
Mind you, they raided the camp, the barrack rooms, very often, quite often, to try to find. They knew we'd got radio sets, but where they were, they didn't know.
These chaps were very ingenious. They used to leave a bit of equipment on a table, and as soon as the Germans found this, they said, we found it, and off they'd go. They'd found something that was valuable, and of course we were allowed back in the hut from there.
The guards on the prison camps were not the cream of the German army. They were ragtag, and it meant that if they were looking for radio sets, they didn't see knives or anything like that. They weren't looking for knives. They'd been told, look for radio sets. So everything else was left alone.
So we were in contact with the news all the time.
We knew what was happening better than what the Germans knew. We could have told them the news 3 days before they told us.
We knew about D-Day before the Germans did.
London calling at the home, overseas and European services. Supreme headquarters of just destroyed naval forces, supported by strong air forces, began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France.
The news of the landings in Normandy in the summer of 1944 reached the camps. This welcome, long-awaited news set the prisoners into a rush of excitement.
A night shift came home in a marching fashion, orderly, in through the gate, counted, and as soon as they got into the space between the barrack rooms, they started yelling and screaming and chucking their hats in the air, and of course that woke up the sleeping shift, and everybody got out saying, "What the going on?"
It was D-Day, but on the German newspaper was a huge V in red, front page. The V1 has been launched against England. And of course we saw that and thought, good Christ, now they're bombing London and all the big towns in England.
One of the guards in the camp was a First World War chap. And when we heard through the radio that D-Day had happened, he was more happy than what we was. He said, "Oh, lovely." He said, "Won't be long before you're over now," he said. "You'll be home soon."
The excitement over the news of the Allied advance was short-lived. Their hopes of liberation were shattered as the weeks passed and the Allied progress slowed. Life in the camps continued as normal, with the thought of another hard winter behind wire in front of them. Along the Eastern Front, the Russians advanced in fearless fashion. This sent the Germans into a blind panic, fear of being taken prisoner or being shot for their brutality during the Russian campaign.
And every morning, the man of confidence came around every hut and shut the doors, and everybody was on watch while he read us out the latest news, so we were up to date with what was happening.
He said, "The Russians are coming very near," he said.
That was the big thing. That was really frightening the Germans.
Working parties on remote farmlands continued to carry out their duties, unaware of the advancing Russians.
Never had a clue what was happening at all with the war. I never heard anything. Everybody was scared to talk. We didn't even know until the Russians were 100 miles away that they were so near.
The two Polish men, who looked after the horses, and they had always said that when the Russians got near enough, they were going to do a bunk, and they did.
In the camps along the Eastern Front, things began to change.
We had a good idea because we could hear artillery fire and lighting, etc., and water was practically non-existent in the camp. As hardly any of it was, petering out. So we knew that something was going desperately wrong so far as the Germans were concerned.
But we had noticed that all the factory had stopped producing anything. Everybody, all the civilian workers had disappeared, and the Jews apparently had overnight been shipped up to, I think they went to Belgium.
And they stopped us going to the coal mines. We said, "There's something up here," so we started hearing the guns, the Russian guns going. I thought, "Oh, they're going to leave us here now. They're going to shoot off and leave us in the camp."
As the Russian armies approached, anxiety amongst the prisoners intensified.
We demanded from the German commandant, we should go too, we was bombing. And he said, "You will not go until I get the order from Berlin to move you."
We could hear the Russians fighting up the road at captivity, and we thought, "Oh, good, we're going to get released." And in the first week in January, the Jerrys walked in the camp and told us to pick up what gear you could carry. We are marching you out.
9:30, 10 o'clock, the loudspeakers suddenly announced, "Compounds 1, 2, 3, and 4 will be ready to march in 1 hour."
And we thought, what a time to take us and move us to another place. We thought we were going to somewhere else to work. We had no idea.
And so started the grimmest chapter in the prisoners' lives. Their thoughts of being liberated by the Russians were short-lived. All the harsh experiences so far were not even a taste of the suffering and the horrors that were to come.